Hello buzzers, John here, and welcome to this video where we're going to look at a question posed by Joanne White. She asked us, how do you create starburst effects? Now there are several answers to this, but one of the traditional ways to create a starburst effect is simply using a medium or small aperture such as f11, f16 or f22 and shooting a scene with some point light sources within the frame. This will give you a natural starburst effect as a result of the aperture that's been used, but another way that's just as common is to use a starburst filter. This is a plastic or optical resin filter that fits over the lens and it's etched with a particular pattern. That pattern may give sort of 8 prongs of starburst effect or 4 prongs or 16 even. And what happens is the light source is actually sort of spread along the etchings within the filter to create that starburst effect. So that's 2 ways to create starbursts, but the third one, and the one we're going to look at here, is how you can create them manually within Photoshop. So this is the kind of effect we get. On these candles here inside a cathedral, the starburst effect you can see is fake. It's a digital effect, and I can just switch it off. There we go. That's the original shot, and there's my starburst effect applied to a separate layer. Now the way I've done this, if I just delete this layer, just drag it to the trash, there we go. The way I've done this is by using a brush, and if I go to my brush preset picker, we can see there we have star 8 selected. So all we have to do is set our brush size, make sure we've got white as our foreground color, then we adjust the brush size, let's have it to about there. I'm adjusting size using the square brackets keys to take the brush size up and down, something like that. There's one, then we'll make it a bit smaller for this second one. There's our second starburst, and we'll make it a bit smaller still for this third one. There we go. We could maybe even do that one there as well. Let's just click there. Okay, so we've got our starbursts in place, and to sort of fine-tune them and blend them into your image, all you've got to do is use the opacity slider, assuming you've put them on a separate layer. I haven't, I've just clicked them straight over the top. So that's how you can add starbursts, just by clicking on the image, so long as you've got a brush created. So I'll just delete these. I'm just going to hit Control or Command and Z just to get rid of the effects I've put on. So what you're asking is, okay, so how do I get my starburst brush? There it is there in my brush palette, but I've made this, I've created this manually. So if I delete it just by selecting that brush, right-clicking on it or control-clicking on a Mac, and then I can just hit Delete Brush, and it's gone. All that work has disappeared. So we'll look at how we can actually create our own starburst brushes now in Photoshop. And the way to do it is not doing it manually on the image. Instead, what you want to do is create it on a new document. So what we're going to do is go to File and choose New. And then I'm going to make a new document about 1,000 pixels square. Doesn't need to be much bigger than that. So 1,000 in width and 1,000 in height. 300 resolution, RGB color, white as the background, and hit create. So that gives us a square 1000 by 1000 pixel image. Now we're going to use the pencil tool. That's grouped with the brush tool. So just select the pencil tool and set the size of it to about 6 pixels. So to do that, again, you can just use the square brackets keys. Right will take you up in size, left will take you down in size. So about 6 pixels is all you need, and you want to make sure that you don't have a white brush, but a black brush. So you hit the black and white little icon here, or hit D on the keyboard, and that will give you black as the foreground color. So what we next do is create a new layer, really important. Don't go straight onto your white background, but create a new layer by clicking this icon here. That gives us a blank layer 1 floating above the background, and that's the one we're going to paint our pencil onto. So we start roughly in the middle, doesn't have to be exactly in the middle, but just roughly there or thereabouts. Hold down the Shift key and then go up a bit. Shift will keep it vertical and about there. Then we go down, just follow the line back down and take it down to about the same distance. So we end up with a line roughly in the middle of the canvas, but not going right up to the edge of the canvas. Once you've created this line, and remember it's floating in its own layer, there it is there in layer 1, what we need to do then is use a blur filter just to feather out the edges and make it look more like a starburst. So to do that, we go up to Filter, we go down to Blur, and across to Motion Blur. Now Motion Blur, first of all set angle to 90 degrees so you've got a vertical line, and then your distance Set that somewhere between 250 and 400 pixels. I've gone for 350 in this example, and that looks about right. If you've gone too far, you can set it back a bit. If you haven't gone far enough, you can set it forward a bit, but you don't want it to go off the edge of the document. That's the important thing. Just keep it within the bounds of that square that you've created. So I'm going for about 350 or thereabouts. That'll do the trick. And then once I've set that, just click OK, and we've got that nice feathered edge on our vertical line. Now we're going to duplicate this layer. So hit Control or Command and J. That's the shortcut to duplicate a layer. And what we're going to do is take this duplicated layer and hit Control or Command and T. That brings up our transform bounding box, and all we're going to do is rotate this box. So to rotate, you just hold the mouse outside the bounding box, and then we hold down the Shift key. That keeps it, it rotates it in increments, so we can make sure we get a nice horizontal line to match our vertical line. It'll come directly out of the center, so everything's lined up nicely. And once you've got that horizontal line working with your vertical line to make a cross, just hit Return on the keyboard and it will set down the changes. What you want to do now is actually merge these two layers together. And the shortcut for that is make sure the top layer is selected, then hit Control or Command and E on the keyboard. That puts them both into one layer, and we've got now our cross floating on its own separate layer. We're going to duplicate this cross now because at the moment we've got a 4-point star and we want an 8-point starburst. So we're going to hit Control or Command and J once more to duplicate the layer, and then we're going to do the same thing again, hit Control or Command and T to bring up the transform bounding box, then hold the mouse outside that bounding box, then rotate it and hold down Shift and you'll get those increments again, and we'll get it at 45 degrees to give us an 8-point star. Hit Return or double-click inside the bounding box once more to set down those changes, and then once again merge those two together by hitting Control or Command and E. So what we have now is an 8-point star all floating in its own separate layer, and that should do the job nicely. But we can refine it a little more. You don't have to do this, but it makes things look a little bit better if you do. All we're going to do is run a little bit of blur over the whole thing. So we go to Filter, down to Blur, and across, this time to Gaussian Blur. And we're just going to run a few pixels of Gaussian blur, not too much, that's too high, so we'll take that down. Somewhere between 1 and 2 pixels normally does the trick fine. So I'll go for 1.5 pixels, hit OK, and that applies a little bit of blur, which will help our starburst blend in with the rest of the picture. Okay, now one other refinement you can make to your starburst, you could use it like that, but an extra refinement is to use a bit of lens flare in the middle, and that's going to require the use of yet another layer. So we create a new layer, and then what we need to do, to give the lens flare filter something to work with, we've got to have some actual pixels in this layer. So I'm just going to fill it with black. And because I've got black as my foreground color, I'm just going to hold down the Alt key, that's Alt or Option on a Mac, and then hit Backspace. And that flood fills that new layer 2 with the foreground color, with the black. Now I've got some pixels in there to work with. All I've got to do is go up to Filter, down to Render, and across to Lens Flare. And this brings up my lens flare dialog. Yours could be anywhere within this box, your lens flare representation. So all you want to do is make sure you get it right down to the middle. And you'll see all the circles of flare, all the little flary circles, they will line up right in the middle once you get it there. You haven't got to be absolutely precise, but get as close as you can to centering all that up. Once you've done that, use a brightness of about 100, use a lens type of 50 to 300mm zoom, that gives a nice effect, and then click OK, and your lens flare will be applied to your picture. Now, we need to make this a negative of what it is at the moment. So to do that, you hit Control or Command and I for invert, and that will turn the positive into a negative and give you a white background instead of a black background. We can now blend this with layer 1. So to do that, click where it says normal and choose multiply. That blends the two together. And all you have to do now is make sure you're not dealing with a color image. You want to be dealing with a black and white image instead, because remember, we're making a brush from this. And brushes don't come in different colors. You actually have to add the color or select the color you're going to use to paint with. So we need to make it black and white, and to do that, all you've got to do is make sure that that flare layer is selected, and then just hit Control or Command and Shift and U, and that's the quickest way to desaturate that color and turn it into a mono picture. Okay, now it's maybe looking a bit too big for our starburst, so what I think I'll do is actually make that flare a little bit smaller, and I'll do that using transform. So that's Control or Command and T to go into the transform mode, and then all we have to do is hold down the Alt key or the Option key, and then just drag in a corner, and it will transform in from the center, and that's the kind of size we're after, something like that. So hit Return or double-click inside the bounding box to set down those changes. And if you want to add a little bit of blur to the flare, you can do, no harm in that. So we go to Filter, down to Blur, and across to Gaussian Blur. And we can run a little bit more than we did on the starburst prongs. So we'll just chuck in about 3 pixels, 3.5 pixels, and then we'll click OK. So this is our brush built. That's what we're going to use as our starburst brush. And all we have to do now is save it out as a brush. So to do that, click on the rectangular marquee tool, and then just draw around it, making sure you get the whole thing in, so all of the prongs get contained within that selection. Something like that should be good. Hold down the space bar and you can wiggle things around before you release the mouse, but that looks about right there. So that's got the whole thing in, and once I've got that box around it, all I've got to do is go up to Edit, and then go down in the menu to where it says Define Brush Preset. Click on that, and that will take whatever you've got the box around and turn it into a brush. Now at the moment the name is Sampled Brush 1, but I'll simply call it Star 8 because that's what it is. So I'll click OK to that, and I now have created and imported my brush into my brush preset picker. So I'm done with this, so I can now hit Control or Command and W and just ditch that file. I can close it down, I don't even need to save it, I've built my brush. And if we look in the brush preset picker, we can click on this little drop down here, and we see there at the bottom of all my other brushes, I've got Star 8. That's the one I've just created, and it even gives me the size of 854 pixels. So that's my new brush, and I'm now going to use this new brush to adorn my photo with some starburst effects. Really important, use a new layer once more. So here's my background image, that's what I'm going to use as the base. And then all we do is click on the Create a New Layer icon, so we're putting our brush effects, our starburst effects, into this new layer. So with that done, all I've got to do is select the right color for my brush. I don't want a black starburst effect, so what I'll do is hit this double-headed arrow just down here by the color swatches, and that will swap over the background and foreground to give me white as the foreground color. If you want to do it on the keyboard, just hit D and then hit X, and it does the same thing. D for default, and then X to swap them over to give you white as the foreground. So we're all set for a bit of a starburst action now, and all I've got to do is adjust my brush size. So if I go up in size, I can use the right square brackets key to go up in size. I get the rough idea of what size it's going to be, and I click once there to get a starburst. I can then go down in size for my next starburst and click once there, and then down a bit more in size to get this final starburst here. Oh, there's another candle there. Look, let's have another one in there. A little bit smaller, and we'll click on that. So we've got 4 starbursts added to the photo, and we can switch them on or off, however we see fit. And we can also adjust the opacity just to blend them in, fine-tune the way everything looks, make everything look a bit more realistic and a bit more balanced. So opacity here, I can take it down a bit, maybe to half height, or perhaps just a bit more. Maybe it's kind of 70% or thereabouts to give a nice natural starburst look to the whole thing. So that's it. That's how you create them. The work, as you can see, is not in doing a few random clicks around your image. The work is in creating the starburst effect in the first place. But that's all done in a separate document, saved out as a brush, and once you've saved it, it will be there in your brushes palette. So I hope that was useful. That's how you can make starburst effects in Photoshop. And give it a whirl. It's great fun and can really enhance a low light image, provided you've got those point light sources within the frame that need a little bit of enhancement. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.